Welcome, my friends. Welcome to our little show.
So, the War of the Ring is a thing now.
You mean Rings of Power?
And we've looked at that. Though for technical reasons the sound cut out halfway through and I didn't discover it until too late.
You should have checked the quality of your recordings.
Yes, I know. Probably not lesson learned, but I know.
Repeating the same behavior and expecting different results is a sign of insanity.
Yes, we all know that. It's all very logical and reasonable, but the downside is that people aren't logical.
Observation. Review this clip from Star Trek IV.
Whoever said the human race was logical?
Alright, well, before we start beating a dead horse.
Observation. Review this.
Alright, we get it. This is my show, right? So people aren't logical or reasonable. Fine. That may explain some of the mess Amazon is making with this show. Item. A black, beardless, obviously female dwarf. Item. A black elf. Item. Black hobbits. Item. Changing the nature of Galadriel's character. It takes some incredibly twisty and corkscrew logic to get this stuff to work within the existing lore and canon. All dwarves have beards, and male and female dwarfs are functionally indistinguishable. Even Eol, whom the Silmarillion calls the Dark Elf, doesn't actually have dark skin. No elves did, in fact. The epithets of Light and Dark Elf have nothing to do with good or evil or skin tone. The Light Elves are light solely because they beheld the light of the two trees before they were destroyed by Morgoth and Ungoliant. As for hobbits, we are on a bit firmer, if furry, footing here since there are 3 different hobbit subspecies, and one group is described as having browner skin. But it's a mistake to expect any kind of racial diversity. Why? Why aren't there black elves and dwarves and Asian hobbits? Well, of course, if Eru wanted, he could have taken a hand and made men and elves and hobbits diverse. But why would he? Dwarves being a bit different, having been made by Aule, and then just kind of adopted. Here in the real world, humans evolved and adapted to their environments. People with darker skin, for instance, are the way they are because the extra melanin is an advantage in certain climates. It helps keep you from baking in the sun out on the savannah. It makes sense for real-world people to be shaped by their environment because in the real world we evolved. Divinity may have had a hand in this, but we've proven that whatever role God may play, species change over time. Middle-earth, though, is not the real world. Men and elves and dwarves and hobbits might mix, but they don't evolve. They don't change over time like people do in the real world, unless there's some specific outside influence. They were created, and they stay the way they were created. In fact, we also know that the dwarves and elves all come from the same physical location, at least initially. They didn't spring up with built-in diversity all over Beleriand. In Arda, Tolkien's version of Earth, different races mingling always makes for weakness, not strength, as is the case for the Númenóreans, whom the Silmarillion tells us became diminished through their blood becoming mingled with that of lesser men. That's why by the time of Lord of the Rings, the Númenórean remnants may live longer than other men, but not the centuries that they used to. This is not an attitude that embraces diversity, with a few exceptions. For instance, Aragorn isn't just acquainted with Elrond. Elrond and Arwen are actually his blood relatives, although rather distantly so, as Elrond's brother was Elros, the first king of Númenor. But both Elrond and Aragorn also count Lúthien as an ancestor, whose mother was a Maya, that is, like the Valar, but not quite so powerful. The Silmarillion describes the Maya as of the same order as the Valar, but of less degree. So sometimes diversity might be good, but on the other hand, clearly men, elves, and such can be ranked from lesser to greater, indicating a hierarchy. Hardly equality. Whether you consider this a good thing or a bad thing, or don't give a damn either way, is up to you. I'm getting off topic.
Yes. Is there a point?
Indeed there is, and I'm coming to it. The point is that Middle-earth is not like the United States, though it might be a little bit like England. It isn't England either, though. It isn't a real place at all, and trying to treat it like an ideally diversified mirror of the real world is to turn one's back on what, for better or worse, it actually is.
But liberties must be taken when adapting source material for films. This is a necessity.
Yes, but how can you change before it becomes something other than what it is? How much can you change? I've watched Apocalypse Now, and it's not a bad movie. But I've also read Heart of Darkness, upon which the movie was based. However much Apocalypse Now might be based upon Heart of Darkness, it isn't Heart of Darkness. It's not Heart of Darkness set in Vietnam. Heart of Darkness is set in Africa. It's not the same, even if it explores similar themes in the way that one provided inspiration for the other. I'm no huge fan of Shakespeare, but I do have a moderate fondness for Hamlet. I quite like the version with Mel Gibson, of all actors. Some years back, as I recall, there was an attempt to set Hamlet in modern times in a place more mainstream than Elsinore.
What did you think of it?
No idea. I never watched it. Why would I? When you move Hamlet to modern times in, say, New York, it's no longer Hamlet. On the other hand, I quite liked Ran, which can be likened to a Japanese take on King Lear. But Ran is Ran, not King Lear, wherever it may draw its inspiration from. It, like Apocalypse Now, is good because it does its own thing and doesn't try to be a bastardized version of its source material.
You use extreme examples. I am surprised you did not mention Starship Troopers. The material you cite differs far more extensively than gender and race swapping.
True. Rings of Power does fall more into the category of interpretation rather than reimagining. But Tolkien's worlds are built from the ground up. It's not uncommon for races and individuals to be visually described. We even know what form many of the Valar most often choose to appear in, down to skin tone and hair and even eye color. We know that wizards always appear as old men, though also that wizards are actually Maya and thus, presumably, could appear any way they want, just like Sauron, another Maya, once could. So, why do we feel that it's necessary for Rings of Power to have unsupported racial diversity?
Observation. You have neglected to discuss Galadriel or rumored graphic sexual content.
So I did. There are no sex scenes in The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, or the Silmarillion. There is incest, though it is not described in graphic detail, and thanks to the designs of Glaurung the Dragon, neither party was aware until it was too late. Lord of the Rings is not Game of Thrones. If you like Game of Thrones, I suggest you watch Game of Thrones, up until the ending, or perhaps even the last season at least. As for Galadriel, well, Galadriel was no warrior. We know that she was eager to go with the sons of Fëanor back to Middle-earth and have a realm and power of her own, but female elves are not warriors. Even Lúthien, who, with the help of a talking dog, actually defeated Sauron and kicked him off his island, was no warrior. She didn't wear any armor and didn't engage in physical combat. In fact, Lúthien even confronted Morgoth himself, allowing Beren to sneak in and steal a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown. But she never even picked up a weapon. That's simply not where her power lay. The same goes for Galadriel and Elrond. We know that Elrond was at the siege of the Barad-dûr, and was physically present when Sauron was defeated by Isildur, which meant that he must have been a pretty damn competent fighter. Otherwise, herald or no, he would have been killed sometime either in that battle or during the 7-year siege of Sauron's tower that preceded it. We are told that the might of Elrond is in wisdom, not weapons. For Galadriel to act as a warrior, wearing armor and such like, is a violation of her established character. Not a direct conflict with canon, but at odds with all existing source material.
But it is stated that she was many thousands of years younger at that time. Among humans, youth indicates a likelihood of impulsiveness.
Well, Galadriel isn't human. And elves don't exactly get old. We don't know when she was born, but she might have been hundreds of years old already. It's an interesting idea and may have merit, especially since elves aren't exactly perfect, but it simply doesn't go with what we actually know about the character.
Maybe it is important to inject artificial diversity to appeal to a larger audience, or to adhere to legal hiring practices when procuring actors.
I disagree with both. Lord of the Rings is pretty damn popular without artificial diversity. And in spite of what I've heard since, no one I knew of gave a damn, or even knew that a particular actor was gay. I certainly didn't myself. And in any case, there's plenty of ways to arrive at diversity without race swapping. There's plenty left to be explored. What about the Astari, the wizards who went into the south of Middle-earth? The only thing we know is that they were there, but there are no tales surrounding their exploits. The purpose of the wizards in general was to contest the power of Sauron should he arise again, and we know that the Dark Powers had allies, perhaps even avatars in the south. That's where no small amount of Sauron's military force came from. Why not follow their adventures, given that there are no stories so far as I know dealing with their exploits? There's minimal opportunity for canon violation and quite a lot of freedom where plot and story are concerned. We know that men were far more diverse than elves.
You aren't very progressive.
Change for change's sake has never struck me as especially efficient or reasonable. Not alienating a large existing audience to embrace the whims of a far smaller, more vocal but less financially lucrative one.
You invoke the demonstrated axiom, get woke, go broke, correct?
I was thinking more along the lines of, without respect we reject, but however you wish to see it. Whether that's what will happen here or not, I can't say. Personally, it's often struck me that however good Amazon is at getting packages from one point to another fast and cheap, Amazon doesn't seem to be terribly competent at much else.
You are still mad over what they did with the live-action adaptation of Good Omens, aren't you?
Yes. Yes, I suppose I am. While the trailer for Lord of the Rings looks rather pretty, if you can but put aside the black hobbit and elf, and especially the beardless, obviously female dwarf and Galadriel cosplaying as a warrior, we'll have to see if the story can save it from itself. I am not hopeful. In fact, I have a very bad feeling about it. Kinda like the feeling I got when I went to watch Desolation of Smaug and all hopeful and then realized what I was actually watching. But we'll see. That's all for now.